Hello again, everybody, with John Dodds, Tom Pipines with you, another podcast, and we are at Enders in Heartland, the great Pat Enders. What an incredible man he is, and do you know, John, trivia question for you. Who is one of the outstanding priests at St. Charles in Heartland? None other than this man. He's got his own bobblehead, Father Ken. Yeah, say hello, Father. Yeah, very good. Nice to have you with us. All right, before we get going here, you can find us, by the way, tompipins.com, the Tom Pipins Show with John Dodds, a key player here. I want to get my jacket off. Can one of you good folks take it for me?
Handle it yourself, Pip.
Handle it myself. Okay, the old has-been who never was. Good enough. Okay. Well, the topic today, obviously a topic on the hearts and minds of every Packers fan. We're not talking about Peter LeFleur of dodgeball fame or Guy LeFleur, the former Montreal Canadien, eh? No, we're talking about Matt LeFleur, the 15th coach in Packers history, as we get into the 101st season to come. And boy, oh boy, a lot of eyes will be on this young man. John, what did you think of this hire and the process to get LeFleur to be a green and gold sideline coach?
Well, the process was explained in that long press conference yesterday, which was very informative. I think I watched it on ESPN, and ESPN said they had never seen a president, Mark Murphy, explain in detail as much about the process. So,
and also let out a swear word.
Yeah, that was very unusual to see something like that on live TV. But the process was comprehensive. I think they got the guy they wanted. What's interesting about it is LeFleur, who sounds like a Brewer pitcher, Matt LeFleur or something, doesn't he? If he had stayed he's got an interesting pedigree. If he was recently with Sean McVay in Los Angeles, if he had stayed there, he would be the number one guy on everyone's list. But
would he be calling plays there, though, with Sean McVay? Isn't that why he made the jump to Tennessee?
Exactly.
To call plays?
Yeah, he took a calculated gamble, and he left Sean McVay, the hot guy, and he went to he interviewed for the head coaching job at Tennessee. And in Tennessee hired Mike Vrabel, but they were so impressed with LeFleur that they told Vrabel, you know what you might want to do is interview this guy for offensive coordinator. And Vrabel had never met the guy before. So he interviewed him. He saw what the Tennessee officials saw, and obviously what Mark Murphy saw a year later. So he hired him as offensive coordinator. And people have been looking at the stats, kind of the stats, and analytic freaks are looking at what Tennessee did last year. But what was interesting is I think they were 26th in overall offense. But the most interesting thing, and Murphy alluded to this yesterday, was last year in week 1, the Tennessee Titans went down to play the Miami Dolphins in what was in a hurricane and lightning storm. It was a 7-hour game, and it was delayed 3 times by lightning. And in that game, several key Tennessee Titans got hurt. Their great tight end, Delaney Walker, their outstanding left tackle, Llewellyn, their right tackle had been injured the year before, and their quarterback, Marcus Mariota, hurt his elbow and had a bad elbow the entire year.
He had issues all season, right?
All season. And so the next week, they lost that game to Miami. The next week, they're playing Houston. And he had nothing. He had no tackles. He had no quarterback. And he developed a kind of a mad scientist view. He developed a game where they hiked it directly to the running back and beat J.J. Watt's Houston team in a huge upset. So they used trick plays and he used creativity in that game.
Which is the exact opposite and the criticism of Mike McCarthy, right? Too mundane, too predictable, too unlike number 12, certainly not to his satisfaction at all. So he brings some of this creativity, the West Coast, the connections you mentioned, Kyle Shanahan. He, of course, was on that staff with the Atlanta Falcons and worked with Matt Ryan when they absolutely obliterated, Packers fans remember, Green Bay in the NFC Championship game. So that's got to be a big reason, right? But one thing I'm interested in, people are talking about, is it the interview itself, or is it the man himself who is ready? In other words, were the Packers so blown away by LeFleur in the interview that he gave
I think they were. I think it was the interview.
But is he also capable? You know, you can get the glitz and the glitter. Is a lot of football coaches, just gruff, but they're great football coaches. So you think you're getting both here, and I know the proof will be in the pudding, with a young man, 39 years old, and Matt LeFleur.
What strikes me is how much this hire is like Ted Thompson's hire of Mike McCarthy in 2006. You get a guy, Mike McCarthy, a young guy, off the track. Nobody expected Mike McCarthy to be hired, but he knew the West Coast offense. His West Coast offense was from the Paul Hackett, Marty Schottenheimer version of the West Coast, as opposed to the Bill Walsh, Sam Leitch, Mike Holmgren, Mike Sherman tree. So that was a different situation. But LeFleur is also in the West Coast tree. He's from the Mike Shanahan and Sean McVay,
Kyle Shanahan.
Kyle
right?
Shanahan tree. So
Right.
it's West Coast. And I think it was critically important to get somebody who knows the West Coast. The West Coast offense was put in by the Packers in 1992. And Ron Wolf would always say it took us 3 years before our scouts and the coaches were all on the same page. What do you want at a particular position? We want William Henderson at fullback. Because we need an offensive guard at fullback, essentially, what William Henderson does. What do you need at tight end? We need a tight end who can get over the middle behind the linebackers to keep the safeties occupied to spread the field. So, and Mike McCarthy ran the West Coast and continued that tradition, as Mike Sherman did, as Ray Rhodes did. So the worst thing you can have is in the Aaron Rodgers era, where his biological career clock is running. You don't want to bring in somebody with a whole new system where it's going to take a year to figure it all out. So the worst example of that was when the Packers changed defensive coordinators after the 2008 season, and Aaron Campman went from being the top player in the 4-3 defensive end to a very weak 3-4 outside linebacker. It was not a system fit. So your best player, you couldn't get full value for him, and I think they just let him go via free agency then. You can't afford to have that happen. And with LeFleur, he's bringing the West Coast, but his version of it, kind of more of a sped up version. And the big thing is you have to, sometimes you need to hear from a different voice. And after 13 years,
Yeah, the message was lost, right?
the message
with
was
McCarthy.
lost with Rodgers and McCarthy.
Well, let me ask you this as it relates to LeFleur. He's worked with all kinds of quarterbacks, from Robert Griffin III to Kirk Cousins, you name it, and Mariota, who was ineffective all year. His numbers weren't great as an offensive coordinator with the Titans for that reason, I think. But as you said, Mike McCarthy came from San Francisco. They were way down in offense, and of course, we know the story. They bypass Aaron Rodgers. He was a part of that in the draft to bring on Alex Smith. But what I'm getting at here with LeFleur, he played quarterback at Division II Saginaw Valley State, where the great Jeff Janis went to school, so you know he's going to be a rocking success and a Hall of Famer in every way. But seriously, he's a quarterback-driven guy. Everybody knows that it's all about his relationship, first, last, and in between, with Aaron Charles Rodgers, who apparently called him before he got the job, and LeFleur said, well, I guess I had a pretty good idea I was in the running when Aaron called me. What's your take on how they will get along? And here's a fellow who's only 4 years older than A-Rod.
I think I'd draw an analogy to what Mike McCarthy did to Brett Favre. Brett Favre was about 35 years old, and in 2005 had thrown 29 interceptions the year before. And McCarthy came in, a new voice, and he looked at every interception that was thrown by Brett Favre and told him, Brett, 80% of your interceptions are your late throws over the middle trying to make a play. Do not throw the ball late over the middle. And Favre didn't buy into it for about the first 12 games, and then he did, and they won the last 4 of 2006. Then they went 14-4 in 2007. So that means Brett Favre was 18-4 his last 22 games in Green Bay. And I think Mike McCarthy, that new voice, getting him back to basics.
Which is what the new coach has to do with Aaron, right? I mean, let's face it,
Yeah.
he's developed some bad habits. He's been ad-libbing to the max. I mean, we know part of his greatness is doing that. Again, we've talked on a previous podcast like a point guard in basketball, but playing point guard quarterback, you can't do that. So what is he going to do to rein him in, and what will he do to rejuvenate Aaron Rodgers?
I think he's a technician, and his scheme, he's very detailed with footwork, according to the most of the people that know him. He looks at a quarterback and he thinks it's fundamentals, it's routine, but it's the footwork. The footwork puts you in the right position to make throws. Now, Aaron Rodgers, sometimes your greatest strength leads to your biggest weakness. And Aaron Rodgers' greatest strength is he can break the pocket, he can make all throws to all part of the field without his footwork being solid. This might be a great refresher course, because last year it looked like he got goofed up sometimes where he was making throws without the proper footwork. So this might be just what Aaron Rodgers needs. Fundamental, look back to fundamentals, get back to how you should throw, and then he's going to be, I think LeFleur is going to be able to incorporate his ability to run out of the pocket and make plays outside the pocket. LeFleur is really big with the tight end. He loves to incorporate the tight end. But
And they've got to find one, right? Because they haven't had one since Jared Cook, who could be effective. And we all know they made that great run, winning, 8 in a row, and getting to the brink of the Super Bowl before the Falcons crushed them.
Well, I think they're going to make a run at Jared Cook. Jared Cook's a free agent from Oakland, and I think they might make a run at him, or they might draft one. And there's some tight ends that are interesting. One of them is Irv Smith from Alabama, who will be available at that New Orleans pick at 30. Kind of a big guy who can block. LeFleur is a zone blocking scheme guy, which is another good thing because that's exactly what the Packers are used to. It's zone blocking, but they like to incorporate the tight end more in blocks. Zone blocking simply means that everyone takes a step and turns, and what he likes to do is he likes to have his tight end come back, and if there's a backside blitz coming, if there's a Khalil Mack coming in, the tight end comes up and hits, while Rodgers hands the ball off to the running back, who then goes one step and then cuts back and looks for multiple holes in the zone. So this will be the same type of offense, so they're not going to have to rebuild or get any new. I think there's still going to be a system fit with all the players if they're healthy, if Balaga and whatever are healthy. But I look for them to look for a tight end. Jimmy Graham, I think if they cut him, they will, or let him go, it's maybe a $3 million cap hit. But I'm looking for Jared Cook to make a return.
All right, interesting. We talk about LeFleur, and Packers fans of a female persuasion are most enthused about this gentleman who happens to be quite handsome. We can relate to that, right? When you and I go into nursing homes, I'm telling you, you should see us. They think we're just amazing. More cutaway shots they want on the sidelines of LeFleur. And if he brings his brother in, isn't he at L.A. now or San Francisco? Well, then you're going to have another guy. We assume he's pretty good looking. So that's one salient point that we have to mention. The fans were going crazy. The ladies were after the hire of this. I don't know who he is, but boy, he sure is eye candy. Mike McCarthy, really interesting quotes. Trent Dilfer coming out and saying that Matt LeFleur was Mike McCarthy before McCarthy stopped grinding. I mean, what a cut. You're basically saying the guy stopped working. And you said something about that interesting connection with Cal and all, and maybe it leads back to Aaron Rodgers. Let's get it out.
Yeah, I'd like to know what it is, because I've heard no story about Mike McCarthy being a slack or whatever. I don't know what they're thinking about. I know Mike McCarthy, when you look back, he was divorced without any children when he got here, so I think he spent maybe a lot more time. I think he's got 4 children at least up in Green Bay now with his second wife.
Yeah, he had his daughter, as you know, I think was off to college even back
She was down
then,
in
or
Kansas or
close.
Texas,
Yeah,
or
right?
something like that, as I remember. She's probably in her 20s now.
Yeah.
But if you look even at Aaron Rodgers, does Aaron Rodgers spend the same amount of time in the off season that he did in, say, 2006 and 2007 learning when he was learning the plays, learning to read defenses. I mean, I'd like to know the context of
What
this.
I'm saying, could this have come from Aaron Rodgers, the Cal connection, and then maybe talking to Trent Dilfer, and we mentioned one of the media members in town who's pretty close with Aaron Rodgers, Jason Wilde, who's a fantastic pro.
Yeah.
So maybe ultimately it came from the quarterback himself, and that might have been, if he lost interest in the play call, it may have been he lost respect. And that certainly seemed evident when he was reportedly calling his own plays in the huddle.
Well, I thought Mike McCarthy was cutting edge when he had Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, Jordy Nelson,
In his prime.
and Cobb and James Jones with the tight end of Jermichael Finley. That talent has eroded over time, and so has the offensive line. They lost Sitton and they lost Lang, and Blaga got older. Same thing happened to Favre and Rodgers when Clifton and Tauscher kind of got older and got injury prone. So I don't think they had the weapons, and I think they had to count more on Rodgers. Rodgers became more like Favre. Favre in the later days, after Mike Holmgren left, it was more like his talent with average players around him trying to bring up, and it was fine in the regular season, but you get to the playoffs when you play a better team with better coaching, and Favre couldn't overcome that with the talent that he had. Favre was a 3-time MVP when he had a tight end, Keith Jackson, and a great defense. Rodgers and Favre never had a great defense after that. Rodgers had a good defense in the Super Bowl era.
Right.
So it takes a village.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It takes a village there.
Hey, you know what? We got to include our sponsor. Holy shnikes, as Mike McCarthy used to say. We have to take a time out, and we want to remind you that we are presented by Enders here in Heartland. Pat Enders, it is some of the finest food, wonderful atmosphere. We're thrilled to be here having our fireside chat with Father Ken, by the way, of St. Charles here in Heartland. So we'll take a time out, and then we'll have much more. Want to talk about Brian Gutekunst, his legacy, because as you say, this is not a very good football team. LeFleur isn't going to do it by himself. We know Rodgers can't do it by himself. He's got to get better players. That and more in just a moment.
Everyone at Enter Sports Grill.
I love Antner's Pizza.
This is a great place to bring my family.
Every Friday night I'm here for the fish fry. Their wings are the best.
And the staff is always very friendly.
Nothing beats Enter's Burgers.
Enjoy good food and good times at Enter Sports Grill.
We're back. Okay. You okay?
Yeah.
3, 2, and 1. John Dodds with a gulp of the water, ladies and gentlemen. One of the all-time greats, a Packers legend in his own right from the standpoint of having covered the Pack for 4 decades. Yours truly, blessed to do the same. John is huge in Marquette. This podcast as we go along, and you'll find us at tompipins.com, the Tom Pippins Show with John Dodds. We'll get into Giannis, maybe an MVP candidate. Certainly he looked great as they beat James Harden and company in Houston not long ago, and Marquette with Marcus Howard pouring up 53. But we are back talking about the Packers, the new coach, the 15th in history, Matt LeFleur, and Brian Gutekunst. How much do you think, first of all, that Gutekunst had to do with this hire? Murphy seemingly made the but it's almost like, as someone was saying on the radio locally, I let the boss think he was making the decision, but in the end, I was making the decision. Do you think that this is Goody's guy, Matt LeFleur?
I think it is. I think he looked and saw wanted the youngest guy he could find, someone who could be encouraging on one hand and could challenge on the other. It's going to be a tightrope he's walking with Aaron Rodgers. He's got to challenge him, but then he's got to be the boss, but he's almost got to be a friend and open up for his input, because Aaron Rodgers is the smartest kid in the room.
Yeah.
He's in the first row.
He knows it all. He knows it all.
His hand.
Yes.
Yeah. I think when I look at Mark Murphy, I just saw him, and when Bob Harlan hired Ted Thompson, and Ted Thompson hired Mike McCarthy. The ship was rolling pretty well when Harlan retired after the Super Bowl, or just before the Super Bowl. Murphy took over, and I think Murphy wanted to stay in the background, but then had to come out of the background a year and a half ago when he decided Ted Thompson needed to be replaced. So I think in the future, Gutekunst is going to be the head there to make all the decisions, and I think Murphy will go into the background. That's what I think. He's done a lot of great things with developments around the Lambeau field and money. Green Bay will never lose an Aaron Rodgers because they can't pay him. They might decide not to because of cap implications, but they print money up there, and they spend a lot of money in their plant and equipment, and Murphy's done a great job in that regard. But I think when it comes to football, and Murphy's got an interesting background. He was one of the heads of the Players Association. He was a all-pro safety so he's played.
Sure,
he's
he
been
knows
an
the
attorney.
game.
He's been an athletic director.
Yeah.
He's been in management. He knows it. But my gut feel is he's going to step back. Goody's going to take over, and it was Murphy, Russ Ball, Gutekunst, Jason Walters, the PR director. They were in the.
He's moved up the ladder.
He has. He's. That was the committee, but I think this was a hire. I think they knew who they wanted, and if LeFleur had stayed with the Rams, he'd be the number one hot pick of everyone. Instead,
Before
he left.
going to Tennessee.
He left
yeah.
to go to Tennessee. And
But as it turns out, it's not bad because he had an opportunity to call plays, and people said, well, it was only 1 year. But Matt Nagy, for the Bears, as you're aware, he only called plays for 5 games before he took over in Chicago, and it worked out pretty well, save for that field goal in the playoffs. I mean, Chicago had an outstanding season.
Well, one of the things you always have to remember is it doesn't really matter. If you look at the Chicago Bear coach, he got a lot better after they got Khalil Mack.
It's players.
It's players.
Yeah.
So this is from this point on, it's can LeFleur convince Rodgers that he is legitimate and interest Rodgers and intrigue him for another 3-4 years, the rest of his career. How long is he here? But it's Gutekunst is the one,
That's
is the
right.
key.
The pressure is on him to bring in players.
And they have 3 picks in the top 44, and he's got. And this is a great draft. I was salivating watching that championship game because the front 7 at Clemson, the front 7 at Alabama, the tight end at Alabama. There are some great players. This could be a fantastic draft in certain areas, and what it all comes
Some
down.
outstanding receivers, too, with speed, and that's another area the Packers might want to look at augmenting, particularly if they don't bring back Randall Cobb. Your point.
No, it all comes down to, look at Kevin King. When Kevin King played last year, Green Bay beat Chicago and was competitive against the Rams and New England on the road. When he didn't compete, they were a step down. Will he be healthy? Because it's all about talent. Gutekunst did a great job of rebuilding the cornerback position, but I think what he's going to have to do is find a young tight end they can groom, possibly try to sign a Jared Cook, get him back, and then possibly add an offensive tackle and maybe a durable running back. And always remember that Brett Favre was a 3-time MVP when the Packers had a great defense. So if they can improve the pass rush, if he can get outside linebackers, LeFleur is going to look like an offensive genius when he's winning games, when there's pass rush on the opponent. So he needs to find pass rush, maybe one safety, a middle linebacker, a tight end. But this isn't a laundry list of a team that has no chance to win it all next year. This team does, with a little bit of luck, a good draft, and some health.
And Aaron Rodgers becoming Aaron Rodgers again, no question about that. So pressure on Goody to do the job. Mark Murphy, his legacy will be tied into hiring the general manager, and certainly, at least on the surface, and I think we can say factually, being the guy who made the final call on the head coach. Whether he backs off and lets Brian be the guy down the line, he's really taken a big step out, isn't he?
He is, but I think my read on him is he's probably going to retire at 65 or soon. And all the contracts, it's Aaron Rodgers' contract, Mark Murphy's contract, Matt LeFleur's contract. It all seems to be 4 years with an option for a fifth. We'll all know, and everybody will come out a winner if they can acquire younger talent and get some pass rush. It's all about talent, and everybody will win, and it's up to Gutekunst.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's the agents are kind of an old home week type of, but Trace Armstrong, the former Bear, as you're aware, John, he represents Mike McCarthy, he represents Joe Philbin, he represents Matt LeFleur, and there's another one in there, I think, Mike Pettin, who we all assume will be the defensive coordinator. It isn't official, could happen at any moment. He referenced it, but said, look, I haven't had a chance yesterday talking about LeFleur to hook up and decide if he wants him. But now you've got a guy who he made chicken salad, as we said in the previous podcast, with you-know-what. He didn't have players, and especially when they were ravaged by injury. Interesting fraternity connection, that one guy, and they're all interconnected.
Yeah, and the key thing now, and they asked him yesterday at the press conference, what are you going to do? It's hire a staff. So number one, hire a staff. Ron Wolf told me that in 1992, they needed to hire a staff and get the scouts in and get everybody on the same page as to what player at what position, the requirements were. And luckily, he's going to run the West Coast. Maybe a few more things for the tight end position. But on defense, if they can keep Pettin, then all you need to do is get some pass rush, get some outside linebackers. I listened to Larry McCarron during the radio broadcast, which I encourage anybody to do if you ever want to learn about
The Rock.
Rock.
He's good, isn't he?
And he thought that the position where the Packers needed the most help during the year because of injuries and age and whatever was outside linebacker. And this is the draft to do it. This is the best draft probably in 25 years for defensive linemen and outside pass rushing linebackers. So throw a tight end in that mix, get a young tight end, and but hire the staff, and then basically market himself to Aaron Rodgers. And it was illuminating when Rodgers called up. As you said, that LeFleur kind of guessed that, boy, I'm really in the running because Aaron Rodgers is on the phone.
Supposedly they had a leadership committee that Rodgers was a part of. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting that they also had an NFL committee on coaching, and they would interview and videotape interviews with candidates from across the NFL. Well, I thought that was interesting, and I remember when I worked with the Raiders years ago.
Former scout for the Raiders, by the way, John Dotz.
Area scout, yep.
Area scout.
Area scout. On game day only. I don't want to say anything more than that.
Not many of us can say that.
But they had, back then with the Rooney Rule was new, and Terry Robisky was an African-American longtime coach. And Ron
Former
Wolf,
player, right?
Former player.
Was he a DB?
Yeah. And so former player Ron Wolf interviewed him when he was interviewing Mike Holmgren, and what that forced Robisky to do was get his resume in order, polish his interviewing skills. Ron Wolf gave him feedback, and it was a great experience. Robisky said it was a great experience for him, great experience for everyone concerned. So I think what the NFL has done now, that's 25 years later, the NFL is now interviewing prospective candidates and putting them on videotape and then sharing them with clubs so you can get some background and you can see the interview and get a gut feel for them. I thought that was really interesting.
More on Matt LeFleur coming your way, but also I want to spin back into Mike McCarthy because now that the 15th head coach in Packers history has been hired, we say officially so long to the 14th. McCarthy seemingly will take the year off. We'll talk about that and more. Again, the Tom Pippins Show with John Dodge. You can find us on this podcast at tompippins.com, and we are proudly brought to you by and here at Enders in Heartland, courtesy of Pat Enders and Company. We've got Mike behind the scenes shooting the video with Brentley, two of the greatest producers in the world. We're just going to try to do our part. Mac and more right after these words.
Live at Picaro Ford in Racine.
Not surprising to see customers celebrating at Porcaro Ford. That's Anthony Porcaro.
Excessive celebration on the showroom floor.
Mark Porcaro challenges the play.
Dan, how can we do this? Excessive savings.
Mark, we've been doing it for over 20 years.
They're throwing out the playbook.
Everyone's a winner.
At Picaro Ford, our customers celebrate their purchase. Come and score big at Picaro Ford.
We're a whole new experience in car buying.
The TomPippinShow.com. Tom Pippins with John Dodds, a podcast from Pat Enders here. Enders in Heartland, and we are proud to be with him. Yeah, Brett Favre. Talk about maybe he could have been head coach or quarterback. Imagine Brett as the quarterback's coach. He could have said, "Why?" As Mike was saying, our producer, you can take some vitamins, Brett. Maybe you can wear that elastic band that they have a commercial on every 2 seconds on the Golf Channel, of all things. He and Jerry Rice beating people up in touch football.
Copperfit.
Yes, Copperfit. Maybe that's something I could wear. We sit here long enough, I feel it.
He could have been a player coach.
Yeah. Well, he was great for the high school team back in Mississippi. Mike McCarthy. He'll be a Packers Hall of Fame coach. I always felt, John, that had he won one more Super Bowl, and he might, who knows, that he would be in the conversation, as Mike Holmgren certainly would have been, had he been able to get that second NFL championship. McCarthy's legacy in Green Bay, will it be tied to, hey, he should have won more too because he had a great quarterback, or do you think he was a solid coach? Certainly the numbers bear out the latter. I think Mike McCarthy was an outstanding pick. If Matt LeFleur turns into Mike McCarthy, and maybe he can get a couple of Super Bowls, I think all of Packer Nation will be ecstatic.
Yeah, I thought Mike McCarthy did a great job over the years. The best coach I've seen in the 40 years I've covered the Packers is Mike Holmgren. From an intellectual standpoint, from a communication standpoint, he's just a cut above everyone. But when you have a coach like that, the danger is that you have a Paul Allen or a Jerry Jones or someone else who wants to steal him. I always feared that Holmgren would go back to San Francisco, but I think his wife was a West Coast gal, and she wanted to get back at some point.
And Mike wanted to run his own show, right? I mean,
He did.
imagine had he and Ron Wolf stayed together. I've got to think they'd have had at least one or two more Super Bowl titles.
Yeah, Brett Favre has a 1 hour show on, they have a 1 hour show looking back on him on the NFL channel, and he said if Mike Holmgren had stayed, just think of what we would have done. Mm-hmm. I think they would have probably gone to 2 or 3 more Super Bowls after that.
But I don't think Brett ever would have thrown 29 interceptions in one season because he had him on a reign as much as anybody could have number 4 on a reign.
He was freedom through structure.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he was able to structure. The unfortunate thing is Favre became an icon, and pretty soon when Ray Rhodes came on, it was, what do you think, Brett? So he'd kind of defer to him. I don't know if that's what happened with McCarthy and Rodgers, but one thing about McCarthy is he never came across as a guy that you would worry about losing to Paul Allen or, he was a Pittsburgh guy. There was
Pittsburgh tough, as Thompson said, right?
It was tough. It was tough. It was an interesting hire, but there's something to be said for a guy who was there for 13 years. I mean,
aside from Bill Belichick, it's an anomaly, as everyone knows in the NFL.
Well, when Holmgren left at the end of '98, he took Thompson, Dorsey, he took Mike Reinfeldt, he took the entire coaching staff, and that was devastating for the Packers. And in '99, I thought that was a kind of a hangover, a Holmgren hangover too. We got Ray Rhodes. There's no discipline, and the team went 8-8, and Ron Wolf acted quickly. McCarthy, he showed me something right away when he structured Brett Favre, and he was able to help Brett Favre. And I think he had a good relationship with Brett Favre. Now, the relationship from Favre to and Rodgers under McCarthy, but that's I guess for another. That was uncomfortable. Like
and
Steve
Mike
Young
had
and Joe Montana
yes,
were.
and McCarthy had to be the upfront guy, right? Because Ted Thompson would not talk about it at all, as was his way. He just was not in front of cameras and microphones. But yes, I agree with that. Says a lot. And I always thought that Mike McCarthy was at his best when he was backed into a corner. Remember that line? We're nobody's underdog after Rodgers went down.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I thought the biggest gamble I've ever seen in sports was when Ted Thompson and Mike McCarthy moved on from Brett Favre, who had just taken the iconic quarterback who had just took him to the 2007 title game, and they went on with Aaron Rodgers, who had played a total of 3 quarters in 3 years and suffered a major foot injury and a hamstring injury in that little play. That was amazing. But what I thought McCarthy and Rodgers were joined at the hip beginning in 2009, 2008. And so they
thank you very much. This is Mike Becker, everybody, our awesome producer. Pens drop, but right here we've got it all covered for you. Poor JD's in the middle of a point. He probably will get back to the 1930s Packers, by the way, in just a moment. Mike McCarthy.
Yeah.
Couple things about him. Say what you will, to me, he seemed to lose his edge and was almost. I was sad for him because at the end it was like he knew the end was near. But overall, I think an outstanding coach. Mike McCarthy did not get the Jets job. He said it was the one he wanted with an outstanding young quarterback. It didn't happen. So now he's going to take a year off. Do you think that he will be back? Can you see Mike McCarthy coming back? I'm sure there's a lot of criticism. A lot of people know what happened between Mac and Rodgers at the end, and all the criticism of an offense that seemingly has passed him by, but yet he's a relatively young man at 55. Can you see him coming back and being successful with the team? I certainly can.
I sure can. Yes, I can see him coming back, but you know what he might need to do is he's getting $6 million parting gift from Green Bay this next year. And it might be spend some time with your family, lose some weight. He looks much bigger. Mike Sherman really kind of seemed to gain a lot of weight. Mike McCarthy's brother passed away of a heart attack when he was in his mid-40s. So take care of yourself, get back to your family, and then there's rumors that he's going to be on ESPN too. That ESPN's going to call him. And he's going to do some work for them.
Well, that'd be great. He has fun with that. And listen, let's not feel too sorry for Mike McCarthy. He's going to get $6 to $8 million just to take the year off. I want to ask you though, is there a story that sticks out for you about the former Packers head coach?
Well, there's one story. The first time I met him, and what amazed me about the hire was that when they hired him in 2006. It wasn't a new hire. He was with the Green Bay Packers. He was Ray Rhodes' quarterback coach in 1999 for Brett Favre. So it amazed me that he was able to rein in Favre after the year when he was the quarterback, when Favre kind of was let out of the Mike Holmgren structure into the Ray Rhodes undisciplined structure. And I remember the draft in 1999. The Packers had this gymnasium with a big screen TV, and the media could leave the room, go up to the gym, get something to eat. And who was I sitting next to in the 4th round? Mike McCarthy. You'd have all sorts of interaction back then with the coaches, and it was much more laid back. And so sitting there just talking to him, and they drafted Aaron Brooks, the quarterback, in the 4th round, and he just kind of looked and he said, "Oh yeah, we were looking at him. We really like him. We didn't know if he'd be there, but if he was there in round 4, we were going to take him. Round 4 or 5, we're going to take him." So I just remember that moment.
That banter.
And it's just something that would never happen again because it's so different. I mean, it's instead of being a day and a half marathon of a draft on a Monday and Tuesday, and then going on a Saturday, Sunday, it's now a 4-day. Now it's going to be on all the stations. It's going to be on ESPN, NFL Network, and ABC. I mean, it's just a whole different over 3 days. So
Scrutiny.
I just remember that, and then thinking that Mike McCarthy wasn't as polished in terms of a speaker as Mike Holmgren for the media, but he was always there, and boy, he wasn't out-coached at all in some of the big games. And
He was available and accountable, as he always said he wanted his players to be, right? If you can't get on the field, you got to be available, you got to be accountable.
When you talk about all three phases, down and distance situations, he had his own vernacular, and I don't know if it was
Pad
Pittsburgh.
level. God, I love that pad level, right?
Pad level. But in terms of stress, there's stress when you lose, but there's also stress when there's more pressure. And I just sense that the talent level of the weapons in 2011, the Packers had the fourth best offense in the history of the NFL, and lost to the Giants after the bye, and unfortunately
They had some heartbreaking playoff defeats, didn't they?
Heartbreaking.
At Arizona.
But as that talent, as Driver got older and retired,
Seattle.
as Jones got older and retired, they replaced him with Devontae Adams, but Jordy Nelson got hurt, and those were good, solid players. And if the talent level goes down, you have Aaron Rodgers, more pressure on him to use Geronimo Allison, and I think the more pressure on Rodgers, the more pressure on McCarthy, and I think that's what broke it up a little bit. Plus, you get sick of each other after. I mean, it was 13 years they were together. That's a long time.
Extraordinary. I will never forget, but I do want to say this. You're right. Say what you will about Mike McCarthy. They were not good teams because Ted Thompson missed on his last few drafts. We've talked about that before. So if you have good players, you're very wise, John. As you've said numerous times, you've got to have the players. When Holmgren had them, when McCarthy had them, they looked like geniuses. And you've got the great quarterback, but we understand now that one person cannot do it, even though he was like Clearasil for a while. Aaron Rodgers was able to cover a number of blemishes for the Pack. We found that out when he went out with a broken collarbone a couple of seasons ago. But I will remember this about Mike McCarthy. I think a spiritual guy, I think an honest man, I think a hard-working man. He came from Pittsburgh. I had the privilege of meeting his parents and his brother Joe, who passed away sadly, as you say. Here's a guy who was, attorney general or something, bright, in shape, all of a sudden a heart attack in his 40s, following that crushing loss in Seattle in the NFC Championship game when the Packers had it and just gave it away. Mom and Dad, just outstanding people. He was a fine person, and so I think in the end, history will be kind to Mike McCarthy.
I think so. And he got him to 3 NFC Championship games, a gut-punching loss. I thought the Denver loss in the Super Bowl was bad, but nobody can ever overcome that Seattle game where about 15 dominoes had to fall one way, and they all did. And then they lost in Atlanta, but that was a team that had won 8 in a row, and they were. Howie Long said before the game, I don't know how Green Bay does it. They've had 8 playoff games in a row. They've had to win all these games. They're must-wins.
They were a tired
I think
team.
They're tired.
Injury
They're
riddled.
injured.
Remember, Jordy Nelson playing with a flak jacket, and certainly. Well, we could go on forever and a day, right? But I think what we'll do is we'll see you again on another podcast. We want to say so long from Enders here in Heartland with Pat Enders. We appreciate him very much. Mike is our producer with Brentley. It doesn't happen without them. It doesn't happen without you, so we appreciate it. For John Dodds, Tom Pippins. Find us at tompippins.sports. Tom Pippins, this show with John Dodds. So long, everybody, and listen to the roar of the crowd for Dodds and Pip. Overwhelming. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So long, everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Lots of thank you.